Hello, hello. Welcome to another 10K annual report Let's Play analysis. I'm Sage Seeds Cap, and my goal is to make everyone a financial sage by walking through annual reports together. Nintendo. As some background, I've pulled up from Nintendo's own investor relations website the top selling titles. Wow, I'm surprised the new Pokemon didn't surpass the other Pokemon. Now everybody knows that I am, yes, a Pokemon nerd. Please like and subscribe if you're ready to have this Pokemon nerd take you on a journey through the story behind the numbers of this annual report so that your investment wisdom can blossom. These more well-recognized companies where we're not going to be completely unsure of what's going on in the annual report because of just naturally knowing and hearing about these large companies. These I am going to do a quote unquote over explanation. I'm going to be explaining a bit of the basics of what financial statements are. It might be a couple of times repetitive, especially if you're seeing multiple videos. So for Apple last week, Nintendo this week, these videos are going to be more for the broadest audience, really an entry point into never looking at an annual report ever. For the more obscure companies where we're going to have to dig even deeper because we won't have context to go off of, I'm going to be more directly just shooting straight towards financial analysis without covering the basics very much in those videos. Here it is, Nintendo Company Limited. Now, as a Japanese company, one thing we need to immediately get out of the way is that this is not on any American exchanges, which means they don't follow the same annual report structure as what I have been describing in previous videos. There are differences. For example, there's no item 8 in this one, which, for those that have been watching along, item 8 is my bread and butter opening move. Instead, Nintendo is part of the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and things are a bit more open to creativity in the Tokyo Stock Exchange, but with still the solid structure. For example, they still have the same types of financial statements. They just actually put them at the end, right? This is largely seen as the final bit of information that's needed. Not every Japanese company is going to follow the same thing, but certainly, as you can already tell, there's a lot more emphasis devoted to business overview in these types of annual reports. And something that really there isn't a translation for is the equipment and facilities. These sometimes would be notes in the financial statements for a lot of American or European companies, but they wouldn't be always available. In fact, equipment and facilities sometimes isn't touched on at all. Things like the overview of capital investments, the plans for new installation and retirement of equipment and facilities. These things some companies mention as notes to the item 8s in other markets. In Japan, in Nintendo's case, this is given its own section completely. It's kind of nice. We're going to recreate our opening move. Instead of an item 8, though, we're going to find consolidated financial statements. That's going to be the opening move. The first thing we see is there's 2 years. One of these columns is translated to dollars. This is going to be US dollars. Let's ignore it for now. We're just going to ignore the right column because it's just going to be completely a different currency and a whole world different, basically, than what the rest of the report is. What we care about are going from left to right, what are we seeing here? And this is a balance sheet. A balance sheet represents accounts that really would be changing for day to day. Certainly for Nintendo, they'd be changing day to day. We are going to take one day a year and use that in order to zoom out from the day to day and try to see if there are larger shifts happening in the makeup of the company and the actual infrastructure of the company. Looking here, there's nothing that stands out. The company is largely similar to what it was a year prior to the report coming out. The only thing of note is that their investment securities has, sorry, it highlights the whole thing up here, but it's the bottom highlight here that I'm looking at. Their investment securities has risen by almost 50% in just a single year. For something like investment securities, that may or may not be unusual. Certainly because Nintendo is pretty large, this is a pretty significant increase in investment securities. But really what might be going on is They just don't want to use the money yet, so they're keeping it in investments until they decide what to do with the additional money that they have coming in just as regular business. Similarly, on the liability side, everything is pretty stable, is the word that we would use to describe this. Good stuff, good stuff. The Carl Icahns of the world would be quite interested in wondering when are they going to pay this out to shareholders again, really. If they don't want to return those earnings to shareholders just yet, instead they want to put those into investment securities while they figure out what to do with it, and let them do that. I trust Nintendo. Going to the income statement now, operating profit is actually a bit of a decrease, largely due to a combination of a little bit less net sales and a little bit more selling, general, and administrative. The cost of sales is all the expenses that you pay to your suppliers. And so people that you need to pay in order to have inputs to be able to do your business at all. Lower down, selling, general, and administrative expenses. These are expenses that are everything else you need to pay in order to sell your product once you have it. This is not related to suppliers. This is related to everything to get your product into customers' hands. Now, the combination of cost of sales going down while SG&A going up could mean lots of things, really. Now, these aren't huge shifts, so it's not very useful to speculate, but it is useful to note that of the notes that they're including, both rows have note 3 as an asterisk. That makes me want to remember to look at note 3, and in fact, we'll probably look at note 3 right after. Everything's fairly stable. Like, things are going up and down in different ways, but none of it is of a size that really shouts out as needing a further review. One thing I will say is that with only 2 years, it's quite difficult to get a feel for trends. 3 years is already sometimes difficult to know if there's a trend happening. 2 years is almost not, it's useful. It's better than nothing, but better than nothing is not always the right thing to aim for. With what we have been given, we can still do a good amount. Looking at the last of our opening move trifecta of financial statements, we have the statement of cash flows. This is essentially what the CFO office is going to look at when they want to know how much money they should expect, whereas the income statement is what the CFO office of the company will look at when they want to calculate their taxes. Said differently, this cash flow is going to make adjustments to the income statement in order to match up with what's actually in their bank accounts. That's what we mean by cash flow. This first row, profit before income taxes, comes directly from the income statement, and everything underneath it is where the adjustments happen. Once again, the cash flow statement is largely just screaming stability. We could look at the net cash provided by operating activities. As we can see, remember ignoring the right column because this is just converting to dollars. Compared to 2 years ago, where there was over 600,000 yen in cash provided, 1,000 million, right? So now that has been cut to less than half. The change, though, is largely due to more income taxes being paid this year compared to last year, as well as just in general, more impact from yen appreciation, which is not something that's in the financial statement, but just context I have from outside of this is as a Japanese company, foreign exchange losses largely is the yen versus other currencies. And one of the things that I've been hearing in the news is that the yen has been increasing for a couple years now, as well as a increase in inventories. And so part of what we could say is the net sales going down does not mean that they're not doing business in possibly a positive way. Their net sales have gone down as their inventories have risen. For all we know, that could be Nintendo preparing to have a lot to sell whenever they're ready to sell it. Basically, they get kind of to decide. When you're Nintendo, you kind of get to decide when you want the sales cycle to start and end. Yeah, everything else is fairly fairly standard. Here to exemplify the stability of this business, the cash and cash equivalents at the end of the period is very similar a year ago compared to the current year. Let's rush to the third note. So here's the note that we were seeing in the income statement. Note 3, research and development expenses included in general and administrative expenses and manufacturing costs for the years. Interesting. So this is why it was a note for both the cost of sales and the SG&A, or the selling and general administrative expenses. What they're saying is that their research and development expenses, they break them up into cost of sales and SG&A. And so this number doesn't exist in the income statement in this form, but in order to reconcile that to what might be more common in other um, markets, they are going out of their way to combine their calculation into the more usual research and development expenses. Wow, there's really spending approaching a billion USD in terms of research and development. That's pretty big. Luckily, here we see the rest of SG&A, selling, general, and administrative expenses. The increase is boiling down to a good amount of advertising and some amount of increased research and development, combined with the increasing inventories we saw in their balance sheet. I think a story is starting to present itself here. Nintendo, large enough, iconic enough to really kind of tell people when they're ready to release new product, is ramping up advertising a good amount, an increase of about 10 to 15% here, while having its inventories really shoot up. And I do mean shoot up. We only had 2 years, which limits how far back we can go, but the increase in inventories was very significant just compared to a year prior. This is a company that might be preparing to have its next wave of sales, essentially. There are rumors circulating that the next Nintendo console could happen any day now. Now, this is not something that's been announced, but this is a business essentially preparing for another sales cycle. If you're getting more comfortable with uncovering the stories behind the numbers, please leave a like and subscribe. I believe I've found some fancy charts. Wow! Breaking down the increase in research and development costs, as well as some of the other switches in costs that we were seeing. Here I found more information, plans for new installation and retirement of equipment and facilities. Now, this essentially is highlighting to investors that as of April 2021, with a plan of about 3 years for completion, about $500 million in US dollars is going to creating a brand new research and development facility, creating a brand new facility for molds. Interestingly enough, this molds is very likely to be for the hardware that they do, but it doesn't have to be current gen hardware. It could be preparing to ramp up production of future hardware. In fact, in this kind of presentation, this is almost certainly related to future molds. And then renovating the building, other building. Again, we don't know the details of what the updates are, but an existing building needing to be updated could be because there's a whole new type of hardware about to start going through production. But to really get a deeper understanding, here we have in their business overview section a whole um, really kind of beefy for compared to everything else section about the research and development activities. Now let's dive into this. This is very cool. Everything above this paragraph, so everything above this is kind of explaining their strategy. And I'm gonna probably miss a thing or two, but they're basically boiling it down to why they need research and development, essentially saying Nintendo is a brand recognized for innovation up here. Here they're talking about a lot of interesting things. I'll highlight everything from touch panels, sensors, wireless communication network security, cloud computing, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, deep learning, big data analysis. Not limited to only in-house studies, they also collaborate with other innovators around the world in order to put a Nintendo spin on things. Very, very cool paragraph here. Then they go down to everything that isn't hardware. Um, Software that takes full advantage of hardware. That's how they think about it. This is graphics, music, game scripts, and program development. Something that is also completely different and interesting that they're breaking out is that various network features, Nintendo eShop, connecting players together, and the Nintendo eShop is its own research and development structure. They call it the smart device software. And then, of course, manufacturing processes. Now, they do manufacture hardware all the time. That's a big part of Nintendo's business. They run factories, which not every video game company does necessarily, especially not game developers. Overall, they had the same research and development number that we saw earlier, 843 million US dollars. And excitingly, then they say the outcomes of major research and development activities described below. So let's look into that. They're breaking it down into Nintendo Switch hardware, and then most of the paragraph is for the compatible software, so the Nintendo Switch video games. Then they break it down into the mobile business, and then they break it down into Nintendo Switch Online. Interesting, the Nintendo Developer Portal, a dedicated website for game creators working on Nintendo platforms. And here's the meaty stuff. Nintendo continues to engage in the development of various products and services for the future, including new products that improve people's quality of life in enjoyable ways. Well, as I guess we should have expected, Nintendo's being pretty hush about what the future products actually are. They're willing to say that it is focused on improving people's quality of life. Is that vague? Maybe. Is it not vague? Honestly, if someone's a really big Nintendo fan out there, maybe you can comment and explain what is Nintendo thinking? Well, Nintendo is an innovator. They definitely think of themselves as an innovator, at least. And as such, they're being pretty hush hush about what it is that their future products are going to be. Despite that, though, the fingerprints of a future push are all over their financial statements. The wonderful thing about financial statements is we can see what the business is actually doing, and Nintendo is building up inventory very significantly compared to the last couple years at least. It is ramping up its advertising spend. It is doing everything to indicate that its next piece of hardware is imminent. Hopefully, we get concrete announcements soon. Is it surprising that Nintendo is releasing a new console? Not really. Do I love that despite not announcing anything officially, their financial statements show that they're clearly thinking about it a lot and doing a lot? I do like that. While we were digesting this, I want to take the opportunity to share some of the YouTube channels that I have been watching over the years. Today, the channel I want to share is In 59 Seconds, which will be linked in the description. This channel is exactly what the name says, and it is uh, kind of elite in my mind. Every video is a minute long, 59 seconds more or less, and they just teach you something in 59 seconds. They always teach you one thing. It's always a high quality thing for what I've seen, and it's an enjoyable channel. I definitely recommend you check it out. 1 minute is not a lot of time to give to it. Please let me know in the comments, how are things going? Are people feeling closer to that status of being a financial sage? Other companies, maybe other video game makers, other companies that have kind of control over when they create the next sales cycle. I mean, that's so baller, really, to be able to reach a point where you tell your customers when to be ready to spend their money. It's, not many companies like that. So if you know other companies like that, please comment. Overall, I've had another fun time going through an annual report with you guys. Please don't forget to share your wisdom. Maybe I'll see some of you around the Nintendo eShop if I'm lucky.